Hello lovelies, in this video we're going to be going through the social stratification section for your AQA GCSE in Sociology. Now, go through this video, watch it the night before the exam, watch it for your test, make careful notes from it. Use it to find out which areas you're not so strong in, and then pop over to the website and try the multiple choice questions, which will take you through and help you remember everything that you need to for the exam. Once you've done that, you can have a look at the predicted papers that we've written as well.
AQA GCSE Sociology. Topic 6, Social Stratification. Lesson 1, Functionalist Theory of Stratification. Functionalists believe that social stratification, or the unequal distribution of resources and privileges among different groups in society, serves an important function. According to functionalist theory, social stratification is necessary for the effective allocation of roles within society and for motivating people to perform those roles to the best of their abilities. Functionalists argue that society is composed of different social classes, each of which is made up of individuals with different levels of education, income, and occupation. These different classes are thought to perform different functions within society, and each class is thought to be necessary for the proper functioning of society. Functionalists also argue that social stratification is linked to the promise of rewards. This means that people are motivated to work hard and achieve success, to move up the social hierarchy and gain access to more resources and privileges. For example, people who work hard and achieve a high level of education and occupation will be rewarded with a higher income, greater prestige, and more opportunities for advancement. This in turn will motivate others to do the same, ensuring that society functions effectively. It should be noted that functionalists see social stratification as a positive aspect of society because it makes people work hard and be productive. However, it should be acknowledged that there are critiques of this perspective, arguing that social stratification can also lead to social problems and that it doesn't necessarily ensure that the best people get the best jobs. Davis and Moore are two sociologists who developed a functionalist theory of social stratification. They had a number of ideas about why social stratification is a universal necessity. Firstly, functionally important roles. According to Davis and Moore, some jobs and positions in society are more important than others, and therefore require more education, training, and skill. These jobs are also more highly rewarded in terms of income, prestige, and power. These jobs are what they call important jobs. For example, jobs like doctors, engineers, and managers are considered more important than jobs like caretakers, fast food workers, and security guards. Desirable rewards. They argue that social stratification is necessary in order to ensure that people with the necessary skills and qualifications are in the positions where they can best contribute to society. They argue that the promise of rewards such as high income, prestige, and power motivates people to acquire the necessary qualifications to fill these important jobs. Functionally necessary. Furthermore, Davis and Moore argue that social stratification is functionally necessary in order to have a sufficient number of people to fill important positions. They argue that if everyone were to have the same opportunities and rewards, not enough people would be motivated to acquire the necessary qualifications to fill important positions, leading to a shortage of people with the necessary skills and qualifications to keep society running smoothly. Marxists have a critical perspective on functionalist theories of social stratification. They argue that functionalist theories overlook the ways in which social stratification is used to maintain the power and privilege of the ruling class. Marxists would argue that social stratification is not a neutral or natural aspect of society, but rather the result of class struggle. According to them, the ruling class uses social stratification to maintain its power and privilege by ensuring that the most important jobs and positions of power are filled by people who are loyal to the ruling class and will maintain the status quo. Feminists also have a critical perspective on functionalist theories of social stratification, such as the one proposed by Davis and Moore. They argue that functionalist theories tend to overlook the ways in which social stratification is gendered and how it perpetuates patriarchal structures. For example, feminists would argue that the traditional gender roles and societal expectations that women should be responsible for domestic work and child rearing, and men for paid work, reinforces the gender pay gap and the underrepresentation of women in leadership positions. Feminists would also argue that functionalist theories ignore the ways in which social stratification intersects with other forms of oppression, such as racism and classism. They would point out that women of colour and working class women face additional barriers to upward mobility, and that their experiences of social stratification are different from those of white middle-class men. Lesson 2. Socioeconomic class. In the UK, socioeconomic class divisions are typically categorised into three main groups: the upper class, the middle class, and the working class. The upper class is generally considered to be the wealthiest and most powerful segment of society. They are often associated with inherited wealth and privilege, and hold positions of power in politics, business, and finance. They are often well educated and have expensive tastes, including in terms of leisure activities such as horse racing and hunting. The middle class is often considered to be the middle of society in terms of income and social status. They are typically well educated and have professional or white-collar jobs, such as managers, teachers, and accountants. They may own their own homes and have a comfortable standard of living. The working class is often considered to be the lower or working segment of society in terms of income and social status. They typically have blue-collar jobs, such as factory workers, construction workers, and retail workers. They may rent their homes and have a lower standard of living than the middle class. These socioeconomic class divisions have been shaped by historical, economic, and political factors, such as the Industrial Revolution, the decline of manufacturing, and the rise of the service sector and globalization. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, the rise of the gig economy, and the lack of affordable housing are among the factors that are contributing to an increasingly unequal society, with widening disparities between the rich and the poor. Lesson 3. Sociological perspectives on socioeconomic class. Functionalists argue that different classes perform different functions, and that these functions are essential for the smooth running of society. They argue that the upper class, with their wealth and education, are able to perform the most important and complex tasks, such as running businesses and government. The middle class, with their education and professional skills, are able to perform important tasks such as managing and teaching, and the working class, with their physical labour, are able to perform the manual tasks that keep society running. According to functionalists, this division of labour is natural and efficient, and it is essential for the stability and continuity of society. Marxists have a critical perspective on functionalist theories of socioeconomic class. They argue that functionalist theories overlook the ways in which class divisions are used to maintain the power and privilege of the ruling class. Marxists would argue that class divisions are not a neutral or natural aspect of society, but rather the result of class struggle. According to them, the ruling class uses class divisions to maintain its power and privilege by ensuring that the most important jobs and positions of power are filled by people who are loyal to the ruling class and will maintain the status quo. They argue that the working class is exploited by the ruling class, and that this exploitation is what causes poverty and inequality. Karl Marx, a key Marxist sociologist on the issue of class, had a critical perspective on socioeconomic class. He argued that class divisions are not a neutral or natural aspect of society, but rather the result of class struggle. According to Marx, class is determined by one's relationship to the means of production, which are the resources, tools, and technology necessary to produce goods and services. Marx believed that the ruling class, also known as the bourgeoisie, who own the means of production, exploit the working class, also known as the proletariat, who do not own the means of production. The bourgeoisie use their ownership of the means of production to extract surplus value from the labour of the proletariat. This surplus value is the difference between the cost of labour and the value of the goods produced. Marx also believed that the capitalist system, in which the means of production are privately owned, is inherently exploitive and leads to the accumulation of wealth in the hands of a few, while the majority of people live in poverty. He believed that this system would inevitably lead to a revolution in which the working class would overthrow the ruling class and establish a socialist or communist society in which the means of production would be collectively owned and controlled. Feminists also have a critical perspective on functionalist theories of socioeconomic class. They argue that functionalist theories ignore the ways in which class divisions are gendered and perpetuate patriarchal structures. For example, they point out that women are disproportionately represented in lower paying jobs and that they are more likely to be in poverty than men. They also argue that the traditional gender roles and societal expectations that women should be responsible for domestic work and child rearing and men for paid work reinforces the gender pay gap and the underrepresentation of women in leadership positions. Max Weber, a sociologist, had a different perspective on socioeconomic class compared to Karl Marx. He agreed with Marx that class is based upon the distribution of wealth. However, he felt class was a more complicated issue than Marx presented. He believed that class is determined not only by one's relationship to the means of production, but also by one's market situation and power. Weber defined class as a group of individuals who share similar life chances, which is determined by their income, wealth, and access to goods and services. However, Weber also believed that class is related to status, which is determined by one's social prestige and honour. He argued that individuals in a society can have different status groups based on their religion, education, occupation, lifestyle, and other cultural and social factors. Bieber also believed that class is related to party. This is related to one's power, which is determined by one's ability to control or influence the distribution of goods and services in the market. Those with party have the ability to exercise power over their situation. Weber argued that class and status groups are not fixed and can change over time. He argued that individuals can move up or down the class ladder based on their market situation, power, and status. Lesson 4. Life chances. Life chances refer to the opportunities and resources that individuals have to improve their well-being and achieve their goals. A variety of factors can affect life chances. Research has shown that individuals from lower social class backgrounds, women, individuals from minority racial and ethnic backgrounds, individuals who identify as LGBTQ+, who are older, have disabilities, or from minority religious and belief backgrounds, tend to face discrimination and have fewer opportunities and resources, which can limit their life chances. Lower social class backgrounds. An example. Those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds often have less access to quality education. According to a 2019 report by the Department for Education, only 16% of pupils eligible for free school meals in England achieved good passes in English and Maths GCSEs, compared to 75% of those not eligible. Women, an example. The gender pay gap continues to exist, limiting women's economic autonomy. As of 2021, the UK's gender pay gap was around 15.4%, according to the Office for National Statistics, the ONS. Minority racial and ethnic backgrounds. An example. Discrimination in hiring practices can affect job opportunities. Research by Nuffield College's Centre for Social Investigation showed that minority ethnic applicants have to send 80% more applications to get a positive response from an employer compared to a white person of British origin. LGBTQ+. An example. Discrimination in the workplace can affect career advancement. According to a 2018 report by Stonewall, 1 in 5 LGBT employees experienced verbal bullying at work in the preceding year. Older individuals. An example. Ageism can affect employment opportunities. According to the Centre for Ageing Better, over a third of people aged 50 to 64 feel they have been discriminated against by employers because of their age. Disabilities. An example. People with disabilities often face barriers to employment. As of 2019, only 53.2% of working-age adults with disabilities were in employment, compared to 81.8% of working-age adults without disabilities, according to ONS data. Minority religious and belief backgrounds. An example. People from minority religious groups can face discrimination in various life aspects, including work. According to a 2019 report from the Muslim Council of Britain, only 19.8% of Muslims were in full-time employment, compared to 34.9% in the overall population. Sociological perspective on life chances, including functionalist, feminist and Marxist perspectives, offer different understandings of how opportunities and resources are distributed in society, and how they affect individuals' well-being and ability to achieve their goals. Functionalists argue that society is made up of different parts or institutions that work together to maintain social order and stability. They argue that social inequality is necessary for the functioning of society, and that different individuals and groups are allocated different roles based on their abilities and qualifications. They believe that society rewards individuals with the necessary skills and qualifications with more opportunities and resources, leading to better life chances. Therefore, they feel life chances are a direct reflection of talent, effort, and skills of an individual. Marxist perspectives argue that society is divided into two classes: the capitalist class, who own the means of production, and the working class, who sell their labour for wages. They argue that the capitalist class exploits the working class, leading to a concentration of wealth and power in the hands of the capitalists. This results in the working class having fewer opportunities and resources, leading to poorer life chances. Life chances therefore reflect the unequal distribution of resources due to capitalism. An example of this may be that an upper-class child has a chance for a private school education, which may leave them with better qualifications and contacts to get a good job in the future. Working-class pupils are denied this opportunity. Feminist perspectives argue that society is patriarchal and that men hold more power and privilege than women. They argue that women are discriminated against in various aspects of life, including education, employment, and politics, leading to fewer opportunities and resources, and therefore fewer life chances. They also argue that traditional gender roles and stereotypes contribute to the lack of opportunities and resources for women. Consequently, they feel men have more life chances than women. Lesson 5. Defines affluent worker. Privatised instrumentalism is a concept suggesting that people's class consciousness has declined, and they have become more individualistic and focused on their personal and family needs rather than collective class interests. This would mean that the working class is less concerned about issues like social inequality and are less likely to participate in collective actions against capitalism or the upper classes. Goldthorpe's idea of the affluent worker is based on the idea that some workers in capitalist societies, particularly those in skilled and white-collar jobs, have achieved a high standard of living and a level of affluence that was previously thought to be the domain of the capitalist class. It was argued that this group of affluent workers had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo and the existing power relations in capitalist societies. Goldthorpe's research focused on studying the attitudes and behaviours of skilled manual workers in the British engineering industry in the 1960s and 70s, and found that this group of workers had achieved a high level of affluence, with many owning their own homes, cars, and other consumer goods. He argued that this group of workers had a privileged position in society and that their standard of living had improved significantly over the previous decades. Goldthorpe argues that the concept of the affluent worker has significant implications for the class struggle in capitalist societies. He suggests that this group of workers, who have achieved a high standard of living, are less likely to participate in class-based struggles and more likely to identify with the capitalist class. He also suggests that their privileged position in society may lead them to resist any attempts to redistribute wealth and power, as they fear that such changes would threaten their standard of living. Fiona Devine, a British sociologist, challenges this notion. She revisited this study and went to Luton in the 90s to carry out her research into the affluent worker. She argues that social class has not changed as dramatically as some suggest. According to Devine, many people in the working class still hold feelings of resentment towards the capitalist system and the inequalities it perpetuates. In other words, the collective identity of the working class is not entirely eroded, and there is still a sense of shared experience and common struggle against the capitalist system. It's crucial to understand that Devine's perspective provides an alternative view to theories suggesting the decline of class consciousness. She emphasises that the class struggle and the sentiments against capitalism are still very much alive within the working class. This is important when studying the complex dynamics of social class, social inequality, and collective action in contemporary society. Lesson 6. Poverty as a social issue. Absolute poverty. The definition. Absolute poverty refers to a condition where individuals or households are unable to meet the basic necessities of life, such as food, clean water, clothing, shelter, and basic health care. The World Bank, for instance, defines absolute poverty as living on less than $1.90 per day, adjusted for purchasing power. Relation to the UK. While absolute poverty is more commonly associated with developing nations, it can also be present in highly developed countries like the UK. In such contexts, absolute poverty would manifest as homelessness, severe malnutrition, and lack of access to basic healthcare services. Various social welfare programs and charities in the UK aim to alleviate absolute poverty, although instances still exist. Relative poverty. Definition. Relative poverty is defined in relation to the economic status of other members of the society. People are considered to be in relative poverty if their income or resources are so much less than the average that they are excluded from ordinary living patterns, customs, or activities. This could mean lacking resources to buy the clothing, food, or pay for the housing and social activities that are considered normal or standard in the society they live in. Relation to the UK. Relative poverty is a more prevalent issue in developed countries like the UK. The country uses a relative poverty line, usually set at 60% of the median income, to measure poverty levels. People living under this income threshold are considered to be experiencing relative poverty. It captures not just the lack of resources, but social exclusion, as people in relative poverty may be unable to partake in activities considered standard or normal in their community. Policy measures in the UK aimed at addressing relative poverty often focus on income redistribution and enhancing social welfare services. Both absolute and relative poverty have distinct implications for social policy, and understanding the difference between the two is crucial for targeted interventions. In the UK, while absolute poverty does exist and is a cause for concern, much of the policy focus is often on reducing levels of relative poverty and mitigating its social consequences. Poverty is a complex social issue that has been interpreted and explained in a number of different ways by sociologists and other social scientists. Some of the key interpretations of poverty as a social issue include the culture of poverty, material deprivation, and the impact of government policies and globalization. The culture of poverty is an interpretation that suggests that people living in poverty developed a distinct culture that is different from the culture of the mainstream society. This culture of poverty is characterized by a lack of ambition, a lack of motivation, and a lack of social and economic mobility. This interpretation suggests that people living in poverty are trapped in a cycle of poverty that is difficult to break, and that the culture is passed down from generation to generation. Material deprivation, on the other hand, is an interpretation of poverty that focuses on the lack of material goods and resources that people living in poverty have access to. This interpretation suggests that people living in poverty are unable to meet their basic needs for food, shelter, and clothing, and that this lack of access to resources is the primary cause of poverty. Governments have attempted to alleviate poverty and unemployment in several ways, including welfare programs, job training programs, and tax credits. However, the effectiveness of these policies has been debated by sociologists and other social scientists. Some argue that these policies are effective in reducing poverty and unemployment, while others argue that they are not effective and may even create disincentives for people to work. Globalization has been identified as another factor that can affect poverty. The integration of economies across the globe through trade and investment has led to the creation of jobs and economic growth in some areas, but it has also led to increased competition and job losses in other areas. The increased competition and job loss can result in increased poverty for people who lose their jobs or whose wages are driven down by competition. Also, the benefits of globalization tend to be concentrated in developed countries, whereas the negative effects are more likely to affect developing countries. Functionalists view poverty as a necessary part of society, as it serves a functional purpose by providing a source of low-cost labour. According to this perspective, poverty is seen as a necessary evil that is needed to keep the economy running smoothly. They argue that poverty is caused by a lack of effort and ambition on the part of the poor, and that it can be alleviated through individual initiative and hard work. They also argue poverty itself creates jobs. For example, social workers are paid to support people in poverty. Marxist perspectives argue that society is divided into two classes: the capitalist class, who own the means of production, and the working class, who sell their labour for wages. They argue that the capitalist class exploits the working class, leading to a concentration of wealth and power in the hands of the capitalists. This results in the working class having fewer opportunities and resources, leading to poorer life chances. They feel poverty only exists due to capitalism, and therefore the only way to eradicate poverty is to have a revolution and overthrow it. The feminist perspective, on the other hand, argues that poverty is a result of the patriarchal structure of society, which oppresses women and keeps them in a subordinate position. According to this perspective, Poverty is caused by the fact that women are paid less than men for the same work, and that they are often forced to take care of children and elderly relatives without any financial support. This is often referred to as the feminization of poverty. This perspective highlights the intersectionality of poverty and gender, and how it affects women differently than men. Lesson 7. Townsend's concept of relative deprivation. Peter Townsend, a British sociologist, developed the concept of relative deprivation as a way to understand poverty and inequality in society. According to Townsend, poverty should not be defined solely by a lack of material resources, but rather by a comparison of an individual's or a group's living conditions to the living conditions of others in society. Townsend's key ideas on relative deprivation include the following. Poverty is relative. Townsend argues that poverty is not just about a lack of material resources, but also about a lack of access to the same opportunities and resources as others in society. Deprivation is multidimensional. Townsend argues that poverty encompasses multiple dimensions, including economic, social, and psychological, and that all of these dimensions must be taken into account in order to understand poverty. Deprivation is socially constructed. Poverty is not just a result of an individual's or group's lack of resources, but also a result of the way society is organised and the distribution of resources. Deprivation is comparative. Individuals and groups experience poverty and deprivation in relation to others in society. Deprivation has subjective aspects. Townsend argues that poverty is not only objective, but also subjective. Individuals and groups may experience poverty and deprivation differently based on their own perceptions, experiences, and expectations. In 1968, Townsend argued 22% of the UK population were in poverty using the relative deprivation measure of poverty in the UK, in comparison to only 6% if the state standard measure of poverty was used. Lesson 8. Murray's underclass. Charles Murray, an American political scientist, developed the concept of an underclass as a way to understand poverty and inequality in society. According to Murray, the underclass is a group of people who are permanently excluded from mainstream society and are dependent on government assistance. He argues that the underclass is a result of the welfare state and that government policies aimed at reducing poverty have perpetuated it. Murray's key ideas on the underclass include the following. Number 1. The underclass is a distinct group. The underclass is a distinct group of people who are different from the rest of society in terms of their values, behaviours, and social norms. Number 2. The underclass is a result of the welfare state. The welfare state has created a culture of dependency among the underclass, making them more dependent on government assistance and therefore unable to improve their circumstances. Number 3. The underclass is characterised by certain behaviours. The underclass is characterised by certain behaviours, such as out-of-wedlock childbearing, high rates of crime and drug use, and lack of work ethic. Number 4. The underclass is a threat to society. Murray argues that the underclass poses a threat to society because their behaviours and values are seen as a drag on the economy and a burden on the rest of society. Number 5. The underclass can be fixed. The underclass can be fixed by reducing welfare and other forms of government assistance, and by promoting traditional values such as marriage and work ethic. Lesson 9. Power and authority. Power and authority are two concepts that are often used interchangeably, but they have distinct meanings. Power refers to the ability to influence or control the behaviour of others, while authority refers to the right to make decisions and enforce rules or laws. There are several different forms of power and authority. Traditional power and authority. This form of power and authority is based on long-standing customs, traditions, and beliefs. It is often associated with monarchies, feudal societies, and other pre-modern forms of government. A contemporary example is the royal family. In traditional systems, authority is passed down through family or lineage, and people are expected to obey the rules and laws that have been established by their ancestors. Charismatic power and authority. This form is based on the personal charisma, charm, and persuasive abilities of an individual leader. Charismatic leaders have the ability to inspire and motivate people, and they often have a vision or ideology that people are attracted to. Nelson Mandela is an example of someone who had charismatic power. Charismatic leaders can be found in many settings, including politics, religion, and business. Rational legal power and authority. This is based on rules, laws, and formal procedures. It is the most common form of power and authority in modern societies, and it is often associated with democratic governments, bureaucracies, and legal systems. Rational legal authority is based on the idea that rules and laws are created through a democratic process and are applied equally to everyone. An example of someone with rational authority is the Prime Minister. Formal power and authority. An individual's position or role in an organisation. For example, the president of a company has formal power and authority because of their position, and they can make decisions and enforce rules based on that authority. Formal power and authority are often hierarchical, with people at the top having more power and authority than those at the bottom. Informal power and authority. This form of power and authority is not based on a formal position or role, but rather on personal relationships and social networks. Informal power and authority can be found in many settings, including friendships, families, and communities. People with informal power and authority may not have the legal right to make decisions or enforce rules, but they may be able to influence others through personal connections and social networks. Sociologists have developed various perspectives on power and authority. Number 1, functionalism. Functionalists believe that power and authority are essential for society to function effectively, and that they help to maintain social cohesion and order. Functionalists see power and authority as being distributed in a hierarchical manner, with those at the top having more power and authority than those at the bottom. This perspective emphasises the importance of shared values, norms, and institutions in maintaining social order, and it views power and authority as being legitimate if they are based on these shared values. Number 2, Marxism. This views power and authority as being closely tied to economic relations and class conflict. Marxists argue that power and authority are used by the ruling class to maintain their economic and political dominance over the working class. They view power and authority as being illegitimate because they are used to maintain an unjust and unequal system. Marxists argue that power and authority need to be seized by the working class to create a more equal and just society. Number 3, feminism. This perspective focuses on the ways in which power and authority are gendered, and it highlights the ways in which women are often excluded from positions of power and authority. Feminists argue that power and authority are not distributed evenly in society, and that women are often marginalised and oppressed. They also emphasise the role of patriarchy, which is a system of male dominance, in shaping power and authority relations. Feminists argue that power and authority needs to be redistributed to create a more equal and just society. Lesson 10. The ideas of Bieber on power and authority. Max Bieber was a German sociologist and political theorist who made significant contributions to our understanding of power and authority. Bieber's key ideas on power and authority are summarised as follows. Number 1. Types of authority. Bieber identified 3 types of authority: traditional, charismatic, and rational legal. Traditional authority is based on long-standing customs and traditions. Charismatic authority is based on the personal qualities and charisma of an individual leader, and rational legal authority is based on rules, laws, and procedures that are formally established and applied equally to all in society. Number 2. Power and domination. Bieber defined power as the ability of one person or group to get others to do what they want, even if the others resist. He distinguished between power and domination, with domination being a more stable and legitimate form of power. Domination occurs when those who are subject to authority accept it as legitimate and obey the rules and laws that are established by those in power. Number 3. Legitimacy. Bieber believed that authority must be legitimate in order to be effective. Authority can be legitimate in several ways, including through tradition, charisma, or rational legal rules and procedures. Legitimacy is important because it provides a basis for people to accept and obey authority, even if they do not necessarily agree with it. Number 4. Bureaucracy. Bieber also studied the rise of bureaucracy in modern societies and the role it plays in the exercise of power and authority. He identified several key features of bureaucracy, including hierarchical structures, rules and procedures, and specialization of tasks. Bureaucracy is often associated with rational legal authority, and Bieber argued that it can be an efficient and effective way to organize large-scale social institutions. Lesson 11. Power relationships. Power relationships are influenced by various factors. These factors shape the way power is distributed in society and how individuals and groups are able to access and exercise power. Number 1. Social class. Social class is a major determinant of power relationships. Individuals from wealthier and more privileged backgrounds often have greater access to resources, education, and networks, which can help them to achieve positions of power and influence. On the other hand, individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds may face greater barriers to accessing power and may experience marginalization and oppression. Number 2. Gender. Gender is another important factor affecting power relationships. Women often face significant barriers to accessing power, both in terms of political representation and leadership positions in the workplace. Gender stereotypes and discrimination can contribute to these disparities, as well as social norms around gender roles and expectations. Number 3. Sexuality. Sexual orientation is also a factor that affects power relationships. People who identify as LGBTQ+ may face discrimination and marginalization, which can limit their access to power and influence. Homophobia and transphobia can contribute to these disparities, as well as social norms around gender and sexual orientation. Number 4. Race. People of colour often face systemic racism and discrimination, which can limit their access to power and contribute to marginalization and oppression. White supremacy and colonialism are major contributors to these disparities, as well as other forms of structural inequality. Number 5. Age. Older individuals may have greater access to power and resources, while younger individuals may face barriers to accessing power and may experience marginalization and discrimination. Number 6. Disability. People with disabilities often face discrimination and marginalization, which can limit their access to power and resources. Ableism and inaccessible environments are major contributors, as well as other forms of structural inequality. Number 7. Religion and beliefs. Religion and beliefs can also shape power relationships. People who belong to marginalised religious groups or hold minority beliefs may face discrimination and oppression, which can limit their access to power and resources. Religious intolerance and prejudice can contribute to these disparities. Sociologists have developed various perspectives on power relationships. Number 1, functionalism. Functionalists believe that power relationships are essential for society to function effectively and that they help to maintain social cohesion and order. Functionalists see power relationships as being distributed in a hierarchical manner, with those at the top having more power and those at the bottom having less. This perspective emphasises the importance of shared values, norms, and institutions in maintaining social order, and it views power relationships as being legitimate if they are based on these shared values. Number 2, Marxism. Marxists argue that power relationships are used by the ruling class to maintain their economic and political dominance over the working class. They view power relationships as being illegitimate because they are used to maintain an unjust and unequal system. Marxists argue that power relationships need to be seized by the working class to create a more equal and just society. Number 3, feminism. Feminists argue that power relationships are not distributed evenly in society and that women are often marginalised and oppressed. They also emphasise the role of patriarchy, which is a system of male dominance, in shaping power relationships. Feminists argue that power relationships need to be redistributed to create a more equal and just society. Lesson 12 will be on patriarchy. Sociologist Sylvia Wolby developed a comprehensive theory of patriarchy that has become influential in feminist scholarship. Wolby's theory identifies 6 structures of patriarchy, which are interrelated and work together to perpetuate gender inequality. These structures are summarised as follows. Number 1, patriarchal relations in paid work. Patriarchy is reproduced through the gendered division of labour in the paid workforce, where men often hold higher paying and more prestigious positions than women. Number 2, patriarchal relations in the state. Patriarchy is reinforced through the state's laws, policies, and practices, which are often gendered and can limit women's access to power and resources. For example, until recently, only women could take a year's maternity leave, meaning they were more likely to take on the housewife role. Number 3, patriarchal relations in the household. Patriarchy is perpetuated through the gendered division of labour within households, where women often perform more unpaid labour and have less control over resources. Number 4, patriarchal relations in sexuality. Patriarchy is reinforced through gendered norms and expectations around sexuality, which often limit women's sexual autonomy and promotes male dominance. Number 5, patriarchal relations in violence. Patriarchy is perpetuated through violence, particularly gender-based violence against women, which can be used to reinforce gender roles and limit women's autonomy. Number 6, patriarchal relations in culture. Patriarchy is reinforced through cultural norms and expectations that support and promote male dominance and limit women's opportunities and autonomy.
Ouch! This is why in some videos I explain scratches.